Jeni Browne. Welcome to this week's MFB News. Hope you're all doing really well, that you've had a fantastic week. And you know, for those of you who are on the school holidays at the moment, I don't know about you, but I certainly feel that after 1 month of my son being off school, I'm going to class myself as a survivor of the summer holidays now. They do go on a bit, don't they? Anyway, enough about me and my summer holiday woes. What we're going to be doing this week is giving you the latest rundown on what's been happening with interest rates. We're going to talk about base rate. You'll be more than aware that base rate came down last week, which was a real surprise. I'd actually spent the morning telling you how I didn't think it was going to come down, and then it came down. So it was a surprise, but great news nonetheless. We're going to talk about what happened there, the knock-on impact of swap rates, and then therefore the fallout in terms of how that settles in the real world almost in terms of lender pricing. All positive news, guys, don't worry. We're going to talk about house prices as well. There's been some data come out from Nationwide, so we're going to delve into that a little bit. And then finally, we're going to be moving on to something which probably isn't going to feel quite so positive, unfortunately, which is talking about some of the latest measures that Labour have announced they're going to be bringing in, which are going to affect the private rental sector. Okay, so as I mentioned a moment ago, I spent last week's video telling you why I didn't think base rate was going to come down. I think I did say I was prepared to be wrong, and thank God I said that, because I was. So base rate came down by 0.25% last week, which it was a massive surprise actually. So the capital markets were kind of seeing odds on for a sort of 40% likelihood of a reduction in base rate. So it was a bit of a surprise, but very welcome news. And the money markets have reacted incredibly well to this. So let's start off with 5-year swap rates for a change, because that's the one I tend to focus on quite heavily. So a bit of history. As we know, they were kind of stuck at just over 4% for a really long time, came down below 4%, did a little rain dance, back up they went, and they've kind of been hovering at between sort of 3.8 and 4% for many weeks. Last week we talked about the fact they'd come down a bit to around just under 3.8. This week 3.570, so a massive step down. To give you some context, so 1 month ago 5-year swaps were 3.887, so sort of circa 0.3% higher, so a big reduction month on month. 1 year ago 4.730, so sort of 1.2% lower than they were 1 year ago. Thank goodness for that. 2-year swaps, very similar story. So as of last night, 4.006. 1 month ago, 4.398, so almost 0.4%, so 40 basis points lower month on month, and 1 year ago, 5.401. So again, 2-year swaps are sort of 1.4% lower year on year. So that's really encouraging. So what that does is essentially mean that lenders' costs of funds have come down, which paves the way for lenders being able to bring their mortgage rates down as well. And more on that in a moment. But just to really touch on where this leaves things in terms of predictions for base rates. So I think it's fair to say that there was an expectation that we would see a base rate reduction either in August or September, and we were kind of thinking more September. That's fine, it's August. The kind of word on the street now is that we are expecting a further reduction in November. Now, obviously, these things can move quite rapidly. There's lots of things that go into the decision the MPC make. So we may see things, we may see that actually something happens and there is no further base rate reduction. It could be that they come down again in September, but I think the kind of general consensus is we're expecting one more reduction this year. So that's kind of it in terms of swap rates and base rate news. In terms of what we've seen the lenders do, it's been a really good reaction actually, with some really kind of significant repricing in the last week. And these things can take a while to come through the wash. So I think I might have mentioned this previously, but for some lenders, changing their mortgage products can be quite a quick process actually. They're very agile. Other lenders, it can be quite a sizable task for them, because not only do they have to deal with their treasury, there's marketing, compliance, there's lots of different parts of a lending institution which have to kind of sign off on pricing changes, and then they have to be kind of processed and then fed out to us and then to you guys. So there are going to be further reductions coming in the next week, but where we have seen reduce rates has been quite impressive nonetheless. So the first one, and this is a real biggie because this is the UK's largest buy-to-let lender, is the Mortgage Works, and they've brought rates down by up to 0.45%, which is massive. And this is obviously way more than the cost of funds has come down. So clearly the Mortgage Works had some wiggle room in there already to be able to kind of capitalise on, and not all of their rates have gone down by 0.45, but some of them have. So that's a really big kind of move by the Mortgage Works. We've seen TSB bring their rates down by up to 0.2%, Fleet Mortgages down by 0.3%, Keystone by 0.25%, Lambay down by 0.2%, Molo up to 0.4% reduction on theirs, Lendinvest down by 0.15%, the Cumberland have dropped their variable rates down by 0.5%, and fixed rates have come down by 0.2%. The only outlier, which is a bit curious, is United Trust Bank. They've increased their 2-year fixes by up to 1.06%, but their 2-year fixes have come down by, 5-year fixes have come down by 0.4%. So what that tells me is that UTB just kind of got their pricing model slightly off. They've had to make some changes to kind of make that align in a more kind of appropriate way. So lender rates are coming down, and like I say, this, whereas before we were seeing like 0.05%, 0.1%, or kind of really small reductions, these are really chunky reductions. I don't think we're going to see another wave of the same lenders dropping their prices. I think what there is room for that lenders who haven't made changes to make reductions. So I do expect to be seeing more reductions coming in over the next week. Now, just to kind of touch on how the reduction in base rate will impact variable rate mortgages. So it really kind of depends on what your variable rate mortgage is tracking. So if you have a mortgage which is directly linked to Bank of England base rate, as a matter of course, your mortgage is going to come down by 0.25%, which is fantastic. However, not all variable rates are tracking Bank of England base rates. So some of them might be tracking the lender's own standard in-house variable rate, for example, which may not be directly linked to base rate. So you may see a full 0.25% reduction. You might see a 0.1% reduction. You might see no reduction, because the two things, so the Bank of England base rate and the lender's standard variable rate, are not inextricably linked. So it's the lender's decision as to how they do that. But for those of you who are, particularly those of you who had very old legacy rates from people like Mortgage Express, which are directly linked to base rate, and you've been waiting for rates to come down, thank goodness, really good news for you guys, you will see a 0.25% reduction on your deals straight away. Okay, it feels really, really funny this actually, because a while ago we were reporting on interest rates going up and house prices coming down, and things have kind of gone full circle now. So interest rates are coming down and house prices are certainly now starting to increase. So house prices in the UK rose by around 2.1% year on year in July, and that's the fastest pace of growth since December 2022. And this is according to the latest nationwide house price index. Now this builds on a 1.5% annual growth in June. So we saw a growth in June of 1.5%. And this means that the average house price is now standing at £266,334 in July. The monthly change in house prices was estimated at 0.3% in July, a rise from 0.2% in June. Now, Rob Gardner, who is the Nationwide's chief economist, has said that the housing market activity has been holding relatively steady in recent months, with the number of mortgages approved for house purchases at around 60,000 per month. Now, while this is around circa 10% below the level prevailing before the pandemic struck, it's still a respectable pace given the higher interest rate environment. So essentially what we're saying here is, given the circumstances, the housing market is actually performing relatively well. Now, Gardner said that, for instance, for borrowers with a 25% deposit, and this is now for homeowner stuff, not buy-to-let, just to be clear, the rate on a 5-year fixed rate deal is around 4.6%, which is more than double the 1.9% average recorded in 2019. So as a result, affordability is really, really stretched for many prospective buyers. Indeed, for an average earner buying a typical first-time buyer property, the monthly mortgage payments are going to be equivalent of around 37% of their take-home pay. So if they get their paycheck, money turns into their bank, 37% of that is going straight back out on a mortgage payment, which is really huge. Just to give you a comparison, the prevailing rate pre-COVID was 28% of net take-home salaries. So, you know, people are having to spend a significantly larger proportion of their income on their mortgage payments. Now, Gardner did go on to say that investors expect the base rate to be lowered modestly in the years ahead, which could bring down borrowing costs, but the impact would be fairly modest, as swap rates already embody expectations that interest rates will decline in the years ahead. And this kind of really echoes what we've been saying in the past. So swap rates are a prediction of what's going to happen with base rate. The capital markets are of the belief that base rate is going to come down over the coming years, and they've kind of factored that into that pricing, and that is why your 2-year swap rates are currently higher than your 5-year swap rates, because the at cost of an average fixed rate or average base rate over 2 years is higher than the average of it over a 5-year period. But what he would just finally, Rob Gardner went on to say is that as a result, affordability is likely to improve only gradually through a combination of wage growth outpacing house price growth, which is expected to remain fairly flat with some support from modestly lower borrowing costs. So basically what I think we can kind of take away from that is that we are seeing house prices increasing, but there's not going to be any kind of like massive huge jump up in terms of house prices. It's going to kind of evolve in line with the reduction, a very slow reduction in mortgage interest rates and the increase in wage growth. So it's going to kind of organically grow rather than, for example, after COVID when we had that massive boom in house prices. It's not going to be one of those. It's going to be slow and steady winning the race this time around. Okay, now Labour have certainly been busy when it comes to the private rental sector already since they've been in power, and the last week has thrown up a couple of announcements which are kind of a continuation of that theme. So the first thing that's been announced is that come April 2025, the tax concessions that furnished holiday lets have been enjoying are going to be abolished, which means that essentially furnished holiday lets are going to be taxed in the same way that a normal buy-to-let property would be. So again, just to kind of reiterate, this would be if they're owned personally. If you've got them owned in a limited company, that would be a slightly different kettle of fish. The same rules at the moment. I'm guessing this isn't going to change. Dear God, please don't let it change. Would still apply, but for those people who own furnished holiday lets in their personal names, these are now going to be taxed in the same way as traditional buy-to-lets. Now, just to be very clear, this was a plan that the Conservatives had started. It never got finished, but it looks like Labour are kind of picking it up and running with it. So for those of you with furnished holiday lets, you have until April to enjoy the kind of slightly different taxation arrangements that have been in place for the last few years for you guys. It's going to be changing. Now also, any capital gains or income from a holiday let will form part of the UK investors or overseas property business estate, which means that higher additional rate taxpayers are going to pay 24% capital gains tax on profits from the sale of a holiday let above £3,000. So it's not just the income tax as such, it's also capital gains tax is changing as well. So that's one bit of news. And the other thing is that Ed Miliband, who is the Energy Secretary and Net Zero Secretary, has confirmed that the new energy efficiency plans for the PRS landlords are going to have to increase their properties to an EPC rating of C and above by 2030 or be barred from letting the property out. So again, really kind of picking back up on what the Conservatives started and they never actually finalised, and for good reason they didn't finalise it. Labour are bringing it back now. But I think before we all start getting really kind of anxious about this and worried, first of all, lots of landlords had made plans to improve the energy efficiency of their property. Some had made good on those plans, some still had them in the pipeline. So essentially it's just picking back up where you were. The other thing is that we don't know yet about any exemptions, and there will have to be exemptions because some properties simply cannot become an EPC of C or above. I have a flat in a big old Victorian building. It's never going to be a C. There's no way I can make it a C. You know, and we don't want to lose more private rental stock. You know, as much as it feels like the government may be hell-bent on getting rid of landlords, actually they can't afford for every non-green or property can made green to leave the market because there'd be a massive crisis. So there is going to be exemptions, but what we don't know is how they're going to look. Now, if you cast your mind back to where we were with the Conservatives, there was rumour, it was never confirmed, about a £10,000 spending cap. However, what that really does is disadvantage it kind of brings in the north-south divide essentially. So if you have a property in London which is worth £700,000 and you've got to kind of spend up to £10,000 to try and drag the property up to being greener before you can apply for your exemption, £10,000 in the scale of things comparative to the property value, it's not huge. But when you've got a property probably sort of more in the north of the UK, which may be worth sort of £70,000, £95,000, a £10,000 cap actually proportion is absolutely massive. So hopefully Labour will at least recognise this and be a bit more measured in terms of the cap that they plan to introduce, so people can apply for exemptions. But I think really the message on this one is just to let you know this is now back on the agenda table. We kind of knew this was always coming, guys, didn't we? So no huge surprise there, but it's back on the table. We have sort of 5-6 years to get our ducks in a row, and actually just to watch this space for more information with regards to the devil in the detail. And on that high note, I'm about to swan off for a week, so I won't be here next time around, so I will be back in a fortnight. Now, in the meantime, if you have any questions, you know we'd love to hear from you. 0345 345 6788. And as always, our website is open 24 hours a day, 7 days per week. Look after yourselves, enjoy this glorious weather. Actually, can I just say, I went into the supermarket the other day and they had mince pies in there. So I'm not going to say the word, but actually it did make me kind of realise how these, you know, things are just around the corner. And so just to really kind of absolutely capitalise on the summer while it's still here, because I think it could be gone before we know it. But on that other really positive note, God, I'm full of joy today, aren't I? Yeah, do look after yourselves. Hopefully back in 2 weeks' time with news of more positive rain changes. Until then, look after yourselves.